All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back. My name is Manesh Patel, and we'll get started with the third module in our series in just a minute. We do have a tight schedule today, so due to those constraints, to better get to your questions, please type them into the chat, and the staff will get to them as soon as they can. Do not forget, you can also email questions as well. And if we run out of time to answer questions verbally after each presentation, we will try and get to them at the end of the module. Here's part one of the agenda for Module 3. Today, we'll be tying into what was presented in the two prior modules and apply that information to reviewing projects. We have how to review a project 1, which will be presented by Anthony Roblick, along with myself. And we have how to review a project 2, which will be presented by Cheng-Yu Wu. After the how to review a project presentations, Peter will continue on with groundwater mounding, along with examples of performing the analysis that is required. Then we will have quiz 3, and if time permits, we will briefly cover some of the common issues we have seen in designs. If not, we will provide those slides for reference later. So let's get started. Like I said earlier, I, along with Anthony Roblick, who will take over in the second half of this presentation, are going to go through part 1 of how to review a project. This presentation came about because our review of approved projects during compliance audits showed that projects were being approved even though the calculations and stormwater management reports submitted for local approvals did not comply with the stormwater management rules and the local SCOs. Therefore, should these projects fail, the municipalities involved would be in violation of their respective permits. Here are the goals of this presentation, which are, by no coincidence, the goals of a successful project review. We want reviewers to be able to identify the design and performance standards that must be met on site, review applications for compliance with green infrastructure, stormwater quantity, stormwater quality, groundwater recharge standards, and review BMPs for compliance with the design criteria in the BMP manual. The information required in the stormwater report is specified in the Stormwater Control Ordinance, and checklists are available to help with the review. The reviewer must make sure that any information found missing from the report must be added before approval of the project. The checklist found at this link in the TRA guidance document here on the slide can help with your review of the report and help to just organize your observations and comments. This presentation here is laid out to follow along with this checklist. Now we're going to look at what the reviewer needs to be looking for in the stormwater management report. The first step in the project review is to check if the application package is complete. All the items listed here must be part of the application. Pre and post site and grading plans are essential, as are the associated calculations and any drainage area maps. The details in the report section should match up with the information on all plan pages. Too often, we find that some parts or even all of the stormwater report do not match the site and grading plans because the report was copied from another project. So the reviewer must also be aware of whether or not the permittee has a more stringent standard of what must be met in an application for approval. If so, the reviewer should be looking at all that information. The township's adopt ordinance, which should be posted online, is also a great starting place to find what information is required to be submitted. Another issue we see that should be checked right away is that the plans and reports should also be reflected in the maintenance plan so that the BMPs will continue to function as designed. Too often we see the maintenance plans submitted that were copied from other projects and they don't even match at all the project that was submitted. So like I just said, it is important that the reviewer checks that the site description matches up with the plans. The drainage and discharge points all need to be checked along with any change in pervious or impervious coverage that includes regulated impervious surface and regulated motor vehicle surface for each sub-drainage area. And then also soil information for the site should be included and be accurate. Lisa covered the use of the web soil survey as a means for getting your soil information, and more guidance will be provided later on today. As a side note, print versions of county soil surveys are not always up to date, and they shouldn't be used as your sole resource. The report must include the following information regarding design and performance standards when it comes to what's required, along with any applicable variances, waivers, or exemptions, and how the standards will be met. Again, we find that this is often missing or it doesn't even match up to what is on the plan. So this is very important that this information is provided. The reviewer must be sure that the following calculations are included in the report. Time of concentration, as was discussed in module 2 by Anthony, is essential to characterizing a site. Time of concentration must be calculated and included in the report. Some permittees may require this information be submitted on a CD so that it can be checked. No matter the format, though, it's important to include all of this information, including storm routings, hydrographs, the groundwater recharge spreadsheet, the mounding analysis, if it's applicable, and water quality calculations, and make sure it matches what's on the plans. You saw this slide earlier in Module 1 in the overview presentation. Always check whether the project meets the definition of major development because there could be a chance that it doesn't. Also, be sure to also check the permittee's definition of major development, as it may be stricter than the department standard. To find that, the reviewer should check the permittee's ordinances. One note here, though, you need to distinguish the different types of surfaces, whether it be regulated motor vehicle surface, regulated impervious surface, another type of pervious surface, and etc. in the report. There are one or more major development thresholds that may apply to the project that the reviewer should be aware of, including the residential site improvement standards, the permittee's stormwater control ordinance, and the NJDEP land use regulations. As you see here, each has a definition that you need to pay attention to when you do a review. Once the reviewer has verified that the required information has been submitted and is accurate, they can begin to actually review the design and performance standards. The plans and report must address the information that's listed here. This information is crucial to determining whether the project was designed properly. Information such as whether the project is discharging to a flood hazard area or a Category 1 waterway are often not included and therefore overlooked during the review. This information may also determine whether or not the project requires input from other agencies, such as NJDEP Land Use or even the Pinelands Commission. Under the current rules, a reviewer must ensure the proposed design complies with the design criteria established in the BMP manual, which in turn ensures the design meets the design and performance standards of the rules. If something is an alternative design or method of calculation, the department must be notified of the approval. Along with the other standards, reviewers must ensure the BMPs follow the green infrastructure standards. And for this, the BMP manual provides the design criteria and considerations for the individual types of GIBMPs. Our past stormwater reviewers have shown that many approved projects do not comply with the design standards. Whether these errors were missed by mistake or the reviewer waived the requirements, we aren't really sure, but we found too many errors at this point. If the reviewer did allow for waivers or variances, they must be sure that they were applicable. Can waivers or variances even be granted? That's really not a straightforward answer, and to resolve this somewhat gray area, it's better defined in the rules now. The amendments to 7:8-4.6 were made to clarify the conditions that would warrant the granting of a variance by a municipality for a major development project. The amendments are intended to ensure that municipalities are not granting variances under inappropriate circumstances. Municipalities do not have to grant variances, and they do not have to create a mitigation plan if they do not plan to grant variances. But if they do, they can create a mitigation plan that allows the evaluation of mitigation projects suggested by applicants, allowing for the consideration of projects submitted by applicants as is permitted at NJAC 7:8-4.6A3I. To eliminate any potential misconception that a variance is an exemption from attaining the stormwater management standards, the word exemption was removed from section 4.6 as part of the rule amendment. With the amended version of the rules, the ability to grant variances requires a little more effort by the applicant now. There must be a demonstration that it is technically impracticable to meet one or more of the design standards. So the only allowable variances are for engineering, environmental, or safety reasons, and they have to be spelled out very clearly now. Cost cannot be a factor here. The old low impact development checklist often included statements that something was not economically feasible, and yet cost information was not formally reviewed. Previously, there may have been a site-wide variance allowed, but now the rule located at 7:8-4.6 states a municipality's approval of a variance shall apply to an individual drainage area and design and performance standard and shall not apply to an entire site or project unless an applicant provides the required analysis for each drainage area within the site and each design and performance standard. There's a lot more to the mitigation requirements that must be met to obtain approval of a variance in the amended version of the rules. Mitigation must be part of the municipal stormwater management plan and follow these new requirements. Must be selected from the municipal list of mitigation projects, or it could be proposed by the applicant if it meets the criteria for the municipal mitigation plan. It must be approved no later than the preliminary or final site plan approval. Must be located in the same HUC 14. Must be constructed concurrently or prior to the major development. It must meet the GI standards. And the entity assuming the responsibility of maintenance for the project must submit a written agreement to the review agency. Lastly, the approved variance must now be submitted to the county review agency and DEP within 30 days of approval. Mitigation is required to receive a variance from the green infrastructure standards, but be aware that certain BMPs cannot be used as mitigation measures and that there are minimum sizing and drainage area limitations. Note that vegetative filter strips and grass swales are excluded as mitigation measures, and they don't address quantity control and groundwater recharge. GIBMPs that are used for mitigation need to be sized to manage the water quality design storm at a minimum and are subject to the specified drainage area limitations. Variances from the other standards are as shown on this slide. Note that there is no waiver or variance allowed for groundwater mounding. That's because the steps listed in Chapter 13 of the BMP manual make it clear that if the selected BMP fails to pass the groundwater mounding analysis, another BMP must be selected and assessed, meaning that a whole redesign will be required. The reviewer should also be able to determine whether linear development exemptions exist on the site. The following linear development exemptions may be granted if the requirements are met for each. Construction of an underground utility line if revegetated upon completion. The construction of an above ground utility line if existing conditions are maintained to the maximum extent practicable, and the construction of public pedestrian access if made of permeable materials and are no greater than 14 feet wide. And finally, the reviewer may allow waivers to be granted for the enlargement of a road or railroad or the construction or enlargement of a public pedestrian access if requirements here are met. And they're as follows: public need for a project that can't be met another way, design and performance standards met to the maximum extent practicable. Meeting these standards would require condemning existing in-use structures, and the applicant does not have and cannot get rights to other lands for mitigation. These specific exemptions were discussed earlier in Module 1. Water quantity is exempt if it's in a tidal flood hazard area and flooding will not increase. Water quality is exempt if the site has an NGIPD's permit with specific effluent limits, and groundwater recharge is exempt for previously developed areas in urban redevelopment areas. The last one is also going to be discussed in part 2 of how to review a project, so I'm not going to get too in depth with that, but the reviewer must be aware of them. It is important that the reviewer is aware of what urban redevelopment exemptions are and where they can be applied. Urban redevelopment exemptions can only be granted to previously developed areas of a site. The existence of woody vegetation is a telltale sign of whether this exemption can be granted. If the reviewer finds that woody vegetation has returned to areas of a previously developed site, the exemption is not going to be allowed. Removing woody vegetation and putting new construction over this portion of the site is going to result in a loss of groundwater recharge, so that's why. The reviewer can check the NJ GeoWeb to determine whether the rest of this information is applicable to the site. So in summary, the following are the possible variances, exemptions, and waivers that may be applicable to the site, but it is important that the reviewer takes the time to make sure that they can be applied and that they are only applied to these specific portions of the site that meets the specific requirements. So moving on, the next thing the reviewer should be looking at is if the applicant is meeting the design and performance standards using green infrastructure. The rules do require that the design and performance standards are to be met using green infrastructure. The rules require that GIBMPs be used to address the requirements for groundwater recharge, stormwater runoff quantity control, and stormwater runoff quality control. Subsection 5.2 of the rules includes 3 tables, and they list those BMPs that may be used to meet the design and performance standards. The tables found they specify information on how each BMP may be used. Table 5.1 coincides with Chapter 9 of the BMP manual, which are the GI BMPs, and they include cisterns, dry wells, grass swales, green roofs, manufactured treatment devices, pervious paving systems, small-scale bioretention systems, small-scale infiltration basins, small-scale sand filters, and vegetative filter strips. Some of these BMPs, they cannot receive runoff from motor vehicle surfaces, and they therefore do not address water quality, and those are cisterns and green roofs. Others don't offset the discharge of stormwater runoff from the 2, 10, and 100-year design storms, so they cannot meet the quantity control requirement, like dry wells. And another note here, not all MTDs are considered GI, but the ones that are considered are included here in Chapter 9. These MTDs have a vegetative or soil component that meet the GI definition. And lastly, these small-scale systems listed here have a limited drainage area that they can treat compared to other BMPs. As you can see, the column on the left includes the name of the BMP, and the column on the right includes the maximum contributory drainage area. So for example, if you're using a dry well, the maximum contributory drainage area is going to be an acre, MTDs 2.5 acres, and so on. Note, this is table 5.1, so again, we're only talking about MTDs approved for GI. In the past, we've seen projects that propose to design two small-scale GI BMPs that each have drainage areas just less than the maximum allowed contributory drainage area, so side by side in a corner of the site, so as to try and get around this drainage limitation. However, a design like this is not going to meet the GI definition. So to review, GI means a stormwater management measure that manages stormwater close to its source. The design of a small-scale GI BMP shall be distributed throughout the site and manage the runoff closer to the source that is generating the runoff. So as you can see from the first diagram here, the GI BMPs, they're all clustered together. The second diagram shows two large-scale BMPs in proximity of each other. These BMPs would need to be spread out from each other to cover the entirety of the runoff of the site. Chapter 10 BMPs can be used to address stormwater runoff quantity control. These BMPs can have larger contributory drainage areas than the BMPs that are listed in Chapter 9. And these include bioretention systems, infiltration basins, sand filters, standard constructed wetlands, and wet ponds. Just to note, though, that I said they can address quantity. These BMPs may only be used to meet water quality and recharge if a waiver or variance is granted. BMPs in Chapter 11 are non-GI, and they always require a waiver or variance before they can be used. It's not anticipated that these BMPs will be used much in the future because of what is required in order to grant a waiver or approve a variance, but as for some of the BMPs noted on this table, blue roofs, they don't have a reuse component, and extended detention basins are typically large and require additional treatment to meet water quality standards. The majority of MTDs currently do not have a soil or vegetative component, so they fall onto this table. And then you see non-GI sand filters, subsurface gravel wetlands, and non-GI wet ponds to round out Chapter 11 here. The next thing the reviewer needs to look at is stormwater runoff quantity control. Water quality impacts must be addressed to not only prevent increased flooding due to the development, but also to avoid increased flow rates, which can significantly degrade water bodies downstream from a site. In Module 1, we covered the different options a designer can choose to follow. I'll briefly go through the options to meet water quantity control, as we have found this to be done incorrectly in many of our reviews. It is important to note that the reviewer must make sure that all points of discharge from the site must meet the water quantity control standard, and if not, then the project is not going to be compliant. So let's begin with taking a look at topography. Topography is important in identifying where the stormwater flows and is required to determine drainage areas and the time of concentration. Reviewers should be able to find the topo information on the plans and make sure that it's accurate. This, in some cases, may even require the reviewer to physically see the site as well. It's often difficult for us to find drainage maps in the stormwater report. We also see situations where the drainage calculations in the reports do not match up with the drainage maps in the plans. We need to see existing and proposed contours. We need to see the point of analysis, TC flow paths, and the drainage area to each point of analysis. The reviewer must be sure that the data used in the calculations matches the various maps and plans. This information must also be included on the drainage plans as well. It's very important to understand that each drainage area needs to be calculated separately. The reviewer should see the following calculated separately for each drainage area and must check the calculations for each drainage area. You should not assume that if one calculation is correct, then the rest are correct as well. So here's an example site. The flow was evaluated as sheet flow, directed primarily in a southerly direction. However, we received complaints of flooding along the road lying to the east of the project and from the area northwest of the project. It was determined that the drainage areas were not delineated correctly. Whether or not this was due to an incorrect evaluation of the topography, that's unknown, but this shows why it's important to properly evaluate the topography and delineate drainage areas. To prevent those issues from occurring, the reviewer must verify that all drainage areas are outlined correctly, the proper time of concentration flow path is used, and the time of concentration is calculated properly. The reviewer needs to make sure that any natural ponding on site is included in the model. This is often overlooked, and ignoring it for the existing condition means the allowed proposed volumes will be larger than they actually should be. On the same example site that was shown before, there was a 6-inch deep ponded area within the shape that is depicted here. This was ignored, and the basin was made significantly larger than was needed. If there are any questions as to whether areas of ponding existed on site and it cannot be determined from the photos of the site, you may just have to go in person and see the actual site for yourself. The reviewer should be checking land cover next. Land cover should be clearly marked on the plans and be specific to what the land actually is. It should also include any existing BMPs on site. The reviewer must verify that the plans and cover descriptions in the report match what is actually on the site. Aerial photos can be used to make sure the most pervious cover that existed in the past 5 years has been used in the calculations. Again, it may be necessary for the reviewer to verify land cover conditions in person just to make sure that they've been accurately described. Lisa has gone through how to determine soils, but just to reiterate, it is important to make an accurate determination of the soil types on site. The type of soil greatly affects the functionality of the BMP. Again, the reviewer can find soil info at the NRCS Web Soil Survey webpage, and that link is provided right here. If information on the site's soils cannot be found, you can use the methods found in Chapter 12 of the BMP manual to determine the hydrologic soil group, either from the default HSG method or from soil testing. Making sure that the soil data for the site is accurate is a critical part of the review process. And accurate soil information can make or break a stormwater BMP. So a good practice generally is to review soil testing first. The rainfall depth and intensity information should come from these sources. You will need to make sure the current precipitation adjustment and future precipitation change factors are appropriately applied for the 2-year, 10-year, and 100-year storm events using these tables on the slide, which can be found in Chapter 5 of the BMP manual. NRCS has developed distributions for New Jersey, including NOAA C and NOAA D, which the BMP manual requires the use of. These are already built into many stormwater modeling programs, such as HydroCAD. The reviewer should check that the correct distribution is selected, dependent upon where the site is located. The reviewer should next look at time of concentration. Information on how to calculate it can be found in Chapter 5 of the BMP Manual and the National Engineering Handbook. We also need to determine if the time of concentration in the pre-construction is accurately calculated. We need to make sure that they're not underestimating this value. We need to make sure that the Manning's sheet flow roughness coefficient is 0.4 or less for the TC calculations. According to the NRCS, the maximum Manning's roughness coefficient to be used is 0.8 for woods with dense underbrush, but in New Jersey, we do not have that situation, and the maximum Manning's coefficient for sheet flow in New Jersey that can be used is 0.4. Anthony did cover this in Module 2, and more on this is found in Chapter 5 of the BMP Manual. And as a reminder again, you will need to use the current precipitation adjustment factor and future precipitation change factor tables that are found in Chapter 5 to calculate the travel times for current and projected storm events using the 2-year 24-hour storm event, which will be used to calculate the P2 parameter. So look back through the handouts for the calculations presentation for Module 2 for more information on the correct way to calculate time of concentration. So in summary, the reviewer must make sure that the sheet flow, shallow concentrated flow, and channel flow inputs are all correct. They must make sure that the proper time of concentration was used with the corresponding method. They must check the pre-construction TC calculations, and the reviewer must now check the post-construction TC calculations as it is no longer allowable to be assumed. Curve numbers are associated with the NRCS methodology and are used to calculate the amount of runoff caused by a specific amount of precipitation. The reviewer must be sure that the curve numbers correspond with each specific area based on land cover and hydrologic soil groups. The curve numbers are based on a presumption of good hydrologic condition unless the design engineer provides evidence showing different conditions. Again, this was said in Module 2. Here's an example of what a land cover table might look like from an engineering report. You see here the land cover, the area of the cover, soil types, HSGs, and associated curve numbers. The reviewer must check these numbers and land cover types against what is shown on the plans. Sometimes you could see that they do not match up. So always check to make sure they correspond to each other. In all, the reviewer must check that curve numbers are justified in the report. You can verify these in the National Engineering Handbook. The reviewer is responsible for making sure the chosen values are reasonable and that they are accurate. Now I'm going to hand it over to Anthony Roblick, who will take you through the rest of stormwater runoff quantity. Anthony?
All right, hello everyone. Thanks, Manesh. Let me just pull up the slides here. Okay, so let's continue with unit hydrographs. So we have two types of hydrographs, the SCS hydrograph and the Delmarva hydrograph. When reviewing the NRCS method calculations, the SCS unit hydrograph should only really be used outside of the coastal plain area of the state, except in very rare cases where the design engineer can prove that the conditions that characterize use of the Delmarva hydrograph are in no way present on site within a coastal plain, or use of the Delmarva hydrograph is not permitted, such as when sizing an MTD. But other than those cases, the SCS unit hydrograph should not be used within the coastal plain. And correspondingly, the Delmarva hydrograph should always be used for sites within the coastal plain. And use of the Delmarva hydrograph is actually only acceptable within the coastal plain, can't be used outside. But no matter where you are in the state and which hydrograph is being used, the reviewer must make sure that the same hydrograph is used for both the proposed and existing conditions. So moving on to runoff routing. As you know, runoff from pervious and impervious areas is required to be routed separately. Routing programs may require unchecking a box to separately calculate runoff from pervious and impervious areas if it's within the same like subcatchment. It's the reviewer's job to make sure that this has occurred and that the areas are routed separately. This can be verified by confirming that the printouts provided do not show a composite curve number. And the reviewer must also make sure that a weighted average of pervious and impervious areas was not used. Off-site discharge point, or POA, receives runoff from several sub-drainage areas. Peak flow rate at the discharge point cannot be an arithmetic sum of the peak flow rates from each of the sub-drainage areas. The hydrographs from each sub-drainage area should be combined to find the peak flow rate at the discharge point. So one situation that we often don't see correctly addressed is depression storage, as Manesh alluded to. The reviewer should identify if any depression storage exists on site and that they're included in the model. Depressions can provide stormwater management benefits and should be protected if possible. One problem that arises from ignoring depression storage in the pre-development condition is that it's not possible to accurately calculate time of concentration. So the reviewer must make sure that the depression storage is being modeled as an existing basin in existing conditions. So in general, this is the procedure to follow when reviewing existing condition depression storage somewhere within the confines of a proposed development. So the reviewer must make sure that the depression area is modeled, the time of concentration is calculated from the outlet of the depression to the point of interest correctly, lag the depression outflow by the calculated time of concentration, and then calculate the time of concentration for the remaining area of the site and route it separately. So this is the one example of depression storage that Manesh covered earlier. Had the reviewer conducted a proper review of the existing depression storage, there most likely wouldn't be the issues that are there today. So again, the reviewer must review the time of concentration to the depression area, calculate the stage storage data for the depression area, model the outlet from the depression area, and that could be an orifice or weir, likely a weir, and route the contributory drainage area to the depression area. So this is an example of depression storage modeled in HydroCAD. As you can see, the contributory area is routed to the depression, and the reviewer can input the parameters in the HydroCAD to make sure that the depression was calculated correctly. So in this case, this is the printout. The depression is modeled as a small detention structure discharging over a 22-foot long broad-crested weir. And the lowest elevation here is 49.1 feet and the highest is 49.7. And all this information is taken from the site conditions. So after having reviewed all the input parameters, we should review compliance with the stormwater runoff quantity standard. So option 1 is almost exclusively used for redevelopment. Chapter 5 of the BMP manual includes a discussion and example illustrating this. And as mentioned back in module 1, in order to meet option 1, the post-construction hydrograph cannot exceed at any point in time the pre-construction hydrograph, and that's for both the current and projected 210 and 100-year design storms. So here's an example of a post-construction hydrograph exceeding the pre-construction hydrograph. In this case, the hydrographs are for the projected 100-year storm event. At first glance, the difference appears to be negligible. However, the rules do not permit any exceedance. And if we were to zoom in on this hydrograph, we would see, and we'll do that on the next slide, we would see that the post-construction hydrograph has a higher flow rate than the pre-construction at several points in time. So when we look into the comparison of the hydrographs from the previous slide, we see that multiple values from the post-construction hydrograph exceed those in the pre-construction. And the times of exceedance are shaded in yellow in both the hydrograph and the table here. And although the peak flow rate and this is important, although the peak flow rate of the post-construction hydrograph is less than the pre-construction hydrograph, the difference in the time of concentration under the post-construction condition results in the exceedance. So we won't be covering option 2 as that was previously covered, and skip on ahead to option 3. Option 3 is the most commonly used, although that doesn't mean we don't see many errors with the way it's implemented. This option requires use of stormwater BMPs with a detention function and outlet control structure to attenuate flow. So here's a list of the various Chapter 9 and 10 BMPs that can provide detention. Note that these BMPs are considered GI, which are required to be used to meet the stormwater runoff quantity control standard. Note that Chapter 11 BMPs, which are not listed here, would only be eligible to meet the stormwater runoff quantity requirement if a waiver or variance from NJAC 7:8-5.3, which is the GI standard, was granted. So as we mentioned earlier, the report shall provide routing calculations for all design storms for every sub-drainage area. The reviewer should check that the pervious and impervious surfaces are separately calculated, check the NOAA rainfall distribution, and check the runoff depths. So the report shall provide routing calculations for all design storms and for each sub-drainage area. And here's an example routing calculation. The reviewer should also check to see if exfiltration is used and whether it's discharged from an orifice or weir and whether that discharge meets the reduction requirement. And also check the size of the orifice as we have that 2.5 inch minimum diameter. So for this case, on the printout, it shows that exfiltration was included in the routing calculation and is denoted as discarded runoff, and it's circled down below there. Note that this BMP design does not infiltrate the entire 100-year storm event into the subsoil. As you can see on the slide, primary means the discharge of the 100-year storm through an outlet structure. Infiltration of the entire 210 or 100-year design storm, either current or projected, is allowed only when the existing site conditions are such that no runoff leaves the site in the pre-construction condition, thereby constraining the design to infiltrate 100% of the volume produced in the post-construction condition for the same design storm. But in this case, the maximum storm that can be entirely infiltrated is the largest storm event with no runoff leaving the site in the pre-construction condition. The only other way this would be possible is if the volume of the stormwater runoff to be fully infiltrated is required by law or rule implemented by the Pinelands Commission, the Highlands Council, or any other stormwater review agency with jurisdiction over the project. So moving on, the reviewer must check the groundwater mounding analysis for any BMPs that infiltrate runoff into the subsoil. If there are infiltrating BMPs on site and no groundwater mounding analysis was submitted with the stormwater management report, the reviewer shall ask the design engineer to provide it. Often the groundwater mounding analysis will show the mounding as rising above the bottom of the BMP, which means that the runoff discarded through the basin bottom into the subsoil is reduced from what is assumed in the routing calculation. And if this is the case, the routing calculation will need to be adjusted to use a smaller exfiltration rate, which will result in more flow being discharged through the outlet control structure. And if more flow is discharged from the outlet control structure, then you'll need to check the peak flow rates to make sure that the required attenuation is still being met. So the detention component can be the detention of storage volume above the surface of the water quality design storm. For example, a small scale infiltration basin that is designed to have an outlet orifice at the maximum water level elevation of the water quality design storm, and additional outlets for attenuating runoff from the current and projected 210 and 100-year design storms above that. Alternatively, you may design an under-drained bioretention system with storage pipes below the basin to provide detention space for the current and projected 210 and 100-year design storms. But take note that the provided storage space for detention should be located within the footprint of the basin. So designing a GI-BMP with detention component located somewhere downstream outside the basin's footprint does not meet the design requirements as stated in the BMP manual. So the next section the reviewer should check is stormwater runoff quality. And the stormwater runoff quality requirements are shown here. For new development, the proposed design must remove 80% of total suspended solids in stormwater runoff generated from the water quality design storm. And that's from the net increase in motor vehicle surface. And although there is no numerical target, the reviewer must also ensure that the design removes nutrients to the maximum extent feasible. So each individual drainage area must meet the 80% requirement unless there is convergence prior to discharge from the site. Drainage areas discharging to different locations cannot be averaged together. And additionally, the water discharging within a riparian zone must reduce TSS by 95%. So regulated motor vehicle surface can mean more than just a brand new paved parking lot. It also includes pervious areas that are intended to be used by motor vehicles. Additionally, motor vehicle surface that is currently receiving water quality treatment by vegetation or soil, by an existing stormwater management measure, or by treatment at a wastewater treatment plant, where that water quality treatment will be modified or removed, is also considered regulated motor vehicle surface. The reviewer must make sure that pervious paving areas are treated as regulated motor vehicle surface when considering stormwater quality, although the pervious paving areas designed in accordance with the BMP manual can assist in providing the required TSS removal. So rooftop runoff. Runoff generated by a rooftop is considered clean because it's not typically a significant source of TSS. However, it can be a significant source of nutrients, which the reviewer should make sure is considered in the design. Because of this, pretreatment of rooftop runoff may be a requirement depending on the BMP used, and the reviewer should consult the BMP manual for pretreatment information. So in the previous modules, we talked about the water quality design storm, which is unique to New Jersey. It's the storm that introduces TSS into our collection systems and waterways. It's nonlinear in its distribution and is fairly intense. And here's a graph depicting the total rainfall from the water quality design storm versus time. You can find this graphed in our chapter 5 of our BMP manual. So here's a list of the various chapter 9 BMPs that can provide stormwater quality treatment. These BMPs are considered green infrastructure, which is required to be used to meet the stormwater quality control standard. Note that chapter 10 and 11 BMPs, which are not listed here, would only be eligible to meet the stormwater quality requirement with a waiver or variance. And the BMP manual is designed to help the reviewer identify the design criteria that must be met for proposed BMP to merit the approved TSS removal rate. So in addition to the TSS removal rates, there were also phosphorus and nitrogen removal rates associated with almost every BMP in the manual. And here's the table here, but you can find this in chapter 4 of our BMP manual. But as seen in that table, not every BMP is rated for 80% TSS removal. Sometimes a series of BMPs are used to meet the 80% TSS removal requirement, or the more stringent 95% rate for projects discharging within a riparian zone. And when that's the case, and you need to use a combination of BMPs, justification for the placement order is needed, and that's according to the hierarchy seen here. So start with by TSS removal rate and move on to the nutrient removal rate. And then finally, the ease of sediment and debris removal. Also, the reviewer should verify that 2 of the same kind of BMP are not used in series, as the down gradient one will not be as effective. So nutrient removal is required for all major developments. Some BMPs have nutrient removal capabilities, but the best way to handle nutrient removal is through source control. So as mentioned earlier, water quality BMPs must be designed in accordance with the BMP manual. Alternative designs may be used, but these designs must be submitted to the department for approval. So in summary, when conducting a water quality review, the reviewer must ensure that BMPs used on site to meet the stormwater quality standard are from table 5.1 of the rules and are adequate to achieve the required TSS removal rate and are designed, of course, in accordance with the BMP manual. Must also ensure that stormwater runoff that requires water quality treatment is being treated, and ensure that a deed notice of the stormwater BMPs used on site is submitted for approval and recorded in the county clerk's office prior to the start of construction. So continuing on with some general design criteria for water quality BMPs, there's some criteria that apply to all water quality BMPs. All BMPs must drain down in 72 hours unless they're designed as water features. All infiltrating BMPs must have a minimum 2-foot separation from the seasonal high groundwater elevation, and under drain GI BMPs must have a 1-foot separation. So here's a list of the most commonly used water quality BMPs. We've been seeing a lot of bioretention and GI MTDs, as well as pervious paving systems used now. So every BMP in the manual has a summary page or pages. This is the page for small scale infiltration basins. The paragraph at the top describes how the BMP functions to remove pollutants and lists a TSS removal rate. The table shown below, the description lists whether a BMP can be used to meet each of the design and performance standards. And as mentioned previously in Module 1, the green leaf denotes if a particular BMP meets the definition of GI, and any design type that does not qualify for this use will be so noted. If there's a TSS rating noted across from the gold % sign, that means the BMP is rated for that TSS removal rate if all of the design criteria are met. That's including there being a maintenance plan. And notice that the design summary tables are shaded different colors, and the chapter titles are green for Chapter 9, blue for Chapter 10, and black for Chapter 11. And this is to make the current BMP manual chapters addressing BMPs more visually distinct from the previous version. So small scale infiltration basins are a pretty common BMP for water quality. Small scale infiltration basins achieve the 80% TSS removal rate and may also be used to meet the stormwater quantity and groundwater recharge requirements. Under the current rules, only the volume generated by the water quality design storm may be infiltrated unless specific cases allow for the infiltration of larger storm events, as we previously noted. So that means there should be one or more orifices or weirs in an outlet to discharge the larger storm events. This type of basin has additional design criteria in the chapter and also references the detention basin chapter because studies have shown that frequent inundation during larger storms reduces the ability of a basin to infiltrate, and that's due to groundwater mounding impacts. And if a basin fails, a failed or impaired basin will require retrofit or major maintenance. During your review, you must check that the minimum thickness of the appropriate sand is present and check that the basin is not used as a stockpile location during construction. Look at the existing grading plan and figure out how heavy equipment is going to clear this portion of the site, and make sure that there's anti-compaction language on the plans as well as the as-built soil testing. So small scale infiltration basins is designed for water quantity must have an outlet structure. The reviewer must also not see any underdrains or liners in the design or any topsoil or vegetation in the landscape or planning plan. And there must be no standing water in the basin 72 hours after the precipitation event stops. So here's an example of two infiltration basins. The top one is functioning correctly, and the bottom one has ponding at the inlet locations, and there's a lot of vegetation established. The outlet is over on the far right of the vegetated basin. And this is a pretty big basin, so one question is how will compaction from vegetative maintenance impact the ability of the basin to infiltrate? And additionally, the vegetation that is breaking down in standing water forms a biofilm that can cover the sand layer and greatly reduce the basin's ability to infiltrate. So bioretention systems provide more variability to address the rule requirements and are very commonly used. Shown here is the summary page from the BMP manual for the chapter on small-scale bioretention systems. So small-scale bioretention systems rely on healthy, dense vegetation, and the type of vegetation and thickness of the planting bed determine the TSS removal rate. So rain gardens are a type of small-scale bioretention system and are encouraged under the new rules. There are even types with under drains to help facilitate drainage, and this is a common option for more urbanized settings. So small-scale bioretention systems have specific requirements regarding the depth of the planting media and what that planting media consists of. The planting media is designed to support dense vegetation, but also convey stormwater. It's also important to note that the composition here of inorganics is measured by volume and organics is measured by weight. The small-scale bioretention systems also have specific requirements in regard to stormwater quality, depth, bottom slope, and density of vegetation, which can all be found in the BMP manual. And the reviewer must make sure that this criteria is met for any bioretention system that is being proposed. But in general, all infiltration type BMPs have specific criteria associated with them, and the reviewer should be sure that that criteria is being met. So reviewers must check that the soil permeability was tested and that a factor of 2 was applied to any tested permeability rate. Infiltration BMPs that have design permeabilities between ½ inch per hour up to 10 inches per hour are acceptable. When we get into the groundwater mounting analysis, which you can also read about in Chapter 13, you'll see that infiltrating stormwater causes a temporary and localized rise in the groundwater table. And if this rise is great enough, it can slow down the rate of infiltration so that the BMP does not drain within the 72 hours. And this means that the basin must be enlarged or retrofitted. And that's why it's so important to make sure that the soil testing is done correctly and that the seasonal high water table is properly located. And lastly, when reviewing infiltration basin designs, make sure that anti-compaction language is present along with post-construction soil testing. It will be helpful to include the drain down information in the maintenance plan checklists and logs so that it's easy to find in the future during maintenance activities. So with that, thank you for your attention. Here's our contact information. Changi, are there any questions in the chat, or are they all being handled?
I think I already answered all the question in the chat, but you may still type your question. I think it's 2 o'clock, so we can have like 5 minutes break, and let's come back around 2:06. Thank you. Okay, it's 2:06. So let's start the second presentation in Module 3. My name is Chenny Wu. I'm going to presenting how to review a project, part 2. Before I start my presentation, because I am presenting, so I may not be able to answer your question that you type in the chat. So please bear with me. After I finish my presentation, I will be able to review your questions and answer them either in the chat or I can already answer them. Thank you. So the goal of my presentation is to learn how to review BMP and for compliance with the design criteria. And also we will talk about MTD design, and then we'll address the safety requirement in the stormwater management rules. And then we will briefly go over the groundwater recharge spreadsheets. And in Module 1, you have learned the BMP chapters are arranged in accordance with the order of BMP list in Table 5-1, 5-2, and 5-3. And here's the BMP chapter and the corresponding tables in Stormwater Management Rule that list side by side for your reference. And each subchapter of Chapter 9, 10, and 11 has a section titled Design Criteria. And BMP needs to be designed to comply with those design criteria in order to be credited for the assigned TSS removal rate. And here are the BMP chapter for the GI BMP that can be used for quantity control. If you want to use these as GI BMPs for water quality or groundwater recharge, you need to get a waiver of variance. And the next table is the BMPs that are not the GI BMP. So you will need to obtain a waiver of variance before you can use those BMPs for meeting quality or quantity of groundwater recharge requirements. And here I'm addressing some, highlight some design criteria for each different type of BMPs. So let's start with cistern. That's in Chapter 9.1. The highlights for the cistern is that if you want to design a cistern, the storage volume needs to be at least for the runoff from the the water quality design storm, which is 1.25 inch in 2 hours. But the cistern need to be emptied by the use demand within 72 hours. And for dry well, that's in Chapter 9.2. The design volume of a dry well cannot exceed the runoff from the water quality design storm, but it can be less. And although a dry well cannot be used to treat runoff from motor vehicle service, it can prevent clean roof runoff from being and commingled with the dirty runoff from motor vehicle service, such as from driveway, and reduce the size of BMP they needed for the water quality treatment requirement. And for the pervious paving system, if you want to design a pervious paving system, the storage need to be at least equal to the same thing water quality design storm. And although there's no surface runoff from a previous pavement system, you need to use 98 for the CM value. So the amount of precipitation falling on the previous paving surface can be captured and calculated. For small scale infiltration system and the small scale sand filter, for the small scale infiltration BMP, that it means that you can either infiltrate the runoff into subsoil, or you can have the you have to have the to infiltrate the runoff into the subsoil. So that when you see a BMP that has under drain, they collect the runoff from it being infiltrated to the subsoil. It's not an infiltration BMP. And for the vegetated filter strip, that the runoff must maintain shear flow through the vegetated filter strip. And the TS removal rate and associated the length for the vegetative filter strip depends on the vegetation type, soil type, and the HGG designation and the slope. So you can check the BMP menu. And also, we often see that some design just call a piece of the grazed area as a vegetative filter strip, but not every piece of vegetated area can be recognized as a vegetative filter strip. Only those areas that being designed and maintained strictly in compliance with the design criteria in the vegetative filter strip chapter can have the TSL removal rate. Okay, and next one. And here's waypoint. Waypoint can be a GI waypoint that being used for water quantity purpose, and also a waypoint that is not a GI, which needs a variance or waiver. So let's have a little bit discussion of that. So for the waypoint that is not a GI, so you can only use it for water quantity or quality when you have a waiver and variance is obtained. And it needs minimum a quarter acre permanent pool surface area that's inside the waypoint. And the minimum ratio for the permanent pool volume to the water quality design stone is at least 1:1. And the minimum drainage area for the waypoint is 20 acres. And require very low permeability soil or an impermeable liner. And for waypoint GI, it can be used for water quantity without variance. So we often see development that use waypoints as a GI for water quantity in recent projects. But if that waypoint, GI waypoint is to be used for water quality, then you need a waiver or variance from the stormwater management rule. So in addition to the design criteria for non-GI waypoint, GI waypoint needs to maintain at least a 10-foot wide area of native vegetation along at least 50% of the shoreline, and also include a stormwater runoff retain component that's been designed to capture stormwater runoff for beneficial reuse, such as irrigation. And the volume available for beneficial reuse should be equal or greater than the 1.25 inches of rain falling over the drainage area of the GI wave pump. And stormwater reuse demand is based on the lowest volume needed that would occur over any 3 consecutive days during the year. And beneficial reuse should not cause the water level to lower than the permanent pool water level. And GIBMP that infiltrate water quality design storm runoff into subsoil cannot be the water quality design storm runoff that contribute to the GI wave pump for beneficial use. Excuse me. So for that, the last point, for example, if you already design a bioretention system or rain garden that infiltrate water quality design storm into subsoil, then you cannot claim that the water quality design runoff from that bioretention BMP or rain garden that can contribute the runoff to the GI wave pump. And I want to talk about the beneficial use. The beneficial use of a GI wave pump is often used in landscaping irrigation. And the method to estimate irrigation use should be based on some reasonable assumptions. You cannot readily assign a value such as 1 inch per acre per day to calculate the irrigation use. So here is one source that we have reviewed and think that is a reasonable source that had a source that provide reasonable assumptions. The NRCS has an NJ New Jersey irrigation guide, which provides one method to estimate the irrigation need. If you want to use another method, you need to provide a well-recognized publication showing the method and the variable they use in your calculations. And we will work on the guidance for the situations, but for now we can consider on a case-by-case basis, and the municipality should contact us for assistance in making those determination of whether that beneficial use for landscaping irrigation has been calculated reasonably. So here are some highlights for the irrigation guide to estimate the runoff, the water demand. Here, the first step is to find the available water capacity of the soil and landscaping area, and then find the effective root zone depth of the landscaping vegetation, and find the consumptive use, that's how much inch of water per day. Then obtain the water volume per irrigation and days between the irrigation, so you will know how much water will be consumed in 3 days. So the AWC, the available water capacity can be found from the web soil survey. But when you use that, you have to use the weighted average within the effective root zone depth of the landscaping vegetation. And the irrigation needs as a beneficial use must be consumed by vegetation in 3 consecutive days. And evapotranspiration of the landscaping area has been considered in the consumptive use if you use the NJ irrigation guide. So the evapotranspiration from vegetation should not be counted again. But the evaporation loss from the wave pump service can be counted as part of the beneficial use. The next one is the topic of safety requirement in NJAC, the Stormwater Management Rule 7:8-6.2. First, the BMP need to have trash, rake, and overflow gate, and they have to follow the specification that's in the rules. And also in the BMP menu, we put those requirements in illustration, so it's easier to reference and see what's required to provide the trash rate and overflow rate. And there's a safety requirement for when your BMP has a permanent ponding area that's greater than 2.5 feet, and you will need 2 steps. And that you can see the requirement that's from the rules. Next topic is the MTD. From the we have this requirement that's being effective on April 23rd, 2020. That for MTD to be considered green infrastructure, according to the rule effective adopted on March 2nd, 2020. That the GI definition should be a GI MTD that should be infiltrate the runoff into subsoil or treat the stormwater runoff through filtration by vegetation or soil. And that's we have more elaborated condition in our MTD certification, which is that if MTD that use a biofiltration media, they can be configured above ground and incorporate a tree box, plant box, or shrub to meet the GI definition. But any MTD with biofiltration media that would be placed below ground as a vault without any vegetation can be considered a GI MTD only if the MTD device infiltrates the stormwater into subsoil. And further, the below ground device will need to meet the NJDP BMP menu conditions in chapter 12, having the soil below MTD meet the minimum tested infiltration rate of 1 inch per hour, or have at least 2 feet, and also have at least 2 feet of separation from the season high water table. And that would be able to infiltrate the runoff into subsoil. Another category of MTD is the non-GI MTD that's been seen in Jersey for a long time, which does not infiltrate runoff into subsoil or treat the stormwater runoff through filtration or vegetation. So just a reminder that if the design proposed to incorporate MTDs to meet the water quality design and performance standards, then the MTD must incorporate as a GI MTD into the design, unless a waiver or variance from using non-GI MTD is granted. And we want to emphasize the review engineer must read the certification letter before you approve the MTD design in the major development. The certification letter provides a calculation method to size the and select appropriate model of MTD. And the maximum treatment flow rate is calculated based on the peak runoff rate from the impervious surface during water quality storm. So it's often a question whether the runoff of the surface that consider to meet the maximum treatment available surface is what kind of surface it should be from the impervious surface. And also the certification letter also has other criteria and conditions of the certified MTD. For example, one of the MTD certification letter states that the inlet into the MTD must only be a single inlet. If the site plan shows there are two inlets, direct flow into the MTD, the MTD is not designed in accordance with the certification letter and they cannot receive the TSS removal stated in the certification letter. And also because only specific MTD models from the MTD manufacturer were tested, the manufacturer's other model not listed in the certification letter, even though they have the same type, cannot be used to meet the water quality design and performance standard for the major development in New Jersey. Also, the MTDs were tested under specific configuration and installation specification. MTD that deviates from the configuration of installation specification cannot be used to meet the water quality design and performance standards. For example, if the MTD has certain angle that has the inlet pipe is straight into the MTD, then if you design a pipe that has angle into the MTD, that cannot be meet the certification conditions. So and for the filtration type MTD under the non-GI MTD, the sizing requirement in the certification that indicate that the sizing is based on the maximum treatment flow rate or maximum inflow impervious area. Then the model selection should be based on both the flow rate and the impervious area, whichever result in a highest minimum configuration. And we have the calculation for each MTD in its certification letter. So please check and see how the model should be selected for each different manufacturer's MTDs. And there are more conditions for using MTD, especially for GI MTD that's tested and certified based on the treatment provided by vegetation. In the MTD, you will see the condition require the maintenance of 85% vegetation cover in the certification letter. So you will definitely need to see the maintenance plan that has the preventive and corrective actions to maintain the vegetation cover. And you will also want to check the MTD regulator to ensure the vegetation cover is maintained. And there are more conditions. For example, there are other the certification data may say that the design must follow in order to receive the TS removal. That if they regarding a GI MTD that's underground, so you will need to design to infiltrate the entire water quality design store in order to receive 80% TSA removal. So you have we cannot emphasize more. You have to read the certification letter, and also some certification letter would be expired, and we will issue a new certification letter if they have new models or new tests. But if if the MTD does not have any new tests, then that MTD become expired. So you cannot use those expired MTD in your design. Regarding the calculation method, I think we already addressed this in the previous modules, but we want to emphasize again that the stormwater management rule that's amended on July 17, 2023, remove the rational method. So all calculation of the stormwater runoff for the MTD design should be calculated by an RCS method. And we have the calculation example in chapter 5. And also for the NRCS method, only the SCS standard DUH can be used. And for the precipitation depth, for the calculation of the time of concentration, should be the projected 2-year storm. And in previous module, we have addressed what means the projected 2-year storm in the current rule. So in summary, BMP should be designed to meet the criteria in the BMP menu. And multiple BMP can be used in series when necessary. Infiltration BMP requires detailed soil permeability test, and detention BMP must calculate detention time to determine the TSA removal rate. But again, for example, you are proposing a detention basin, then you will need a waiver a variance to be granted before you can use that the detention basin. And MTD design use NRCS methodology. Next topic is groundwater recharge. The rule requires demonstrate through the hydrological and hydraulic analysis that the site and its stormwater management measures maintain 100% of the average annual pre-construction groundwater recharge volume for the site, or infiltrate the difference in the projected 2-year storm runoff volume. Let's talk about the infiltration of projected 2-year storm. It's a simple calculation, and you just have to calculate the pre-construction and also the post-construction 2-year storm volume and see the difference, and then you design a BMP that can take the volume. But the flip side is that it may need a larger infiltration structure. So that would result in a greater risk of failure and have a larger groundwater mounting possibility. We will address the groundwater mounting analysis in the next presentation. Again, for the projected 2-year storm difference, you have to use the NRCS method and follow all the assumptions of NRCS method that the curve number time of concentration match quantity and quality analysis, which means that often we see the CN numbers or the calculation for the water quality for the groundwater recharge may not be always consistent with those CN numbers that have been used in the calculation of water quantity design storm. So just be sure that they should be consistent through the design calculation. And the other method is to maintain 100% of pre-development groundwater recharge. And in order to calculate the pre-development groundwater recharge, the department has a spreadsheet, and you have to check the numbers and calculations of the spreadsheet that's submitted by the design engineer. And here is the first page of the groundwater recharge spreadsheet. And the orange shaded area are for the inputs, the gray area are for the output. And let's look at the inputs required on the first page. On the left of the page, there are inputs for pre-construction conditions. On the right side, there are inputs for the post-construction conditions. And note that the infiltration is not same as the groundwater recharge here. Here is the infiltration is only for the process to allow the runoff into subsoil. For groundwater recharge, the runoff needs not only to drain into the subsoil, it has to pass the root zone. So for different soil, there are different depths of root zone. Therefore, soil in this spreadsheet play an important role in the calculation of the annual recharge and the recharge provided by the BMP. So on the page 1, the spreadsheet assign annual precipitation based on the municipality, which is data from the NJ, the New Jersey Geological Survey. And as stated earlier, the volume of groundwater recharge is the runoff infiltrate into the subsoil and pass through to the root zone. So the land cover is used to determine how much runoff is infiltrated into subsoil, and the soil series is used to determine the depth of the root zone. The spreadsheet will calculate the pre-development and post-development annual recharge, and the difference will be the deficit. A few notes for when you review the groundwater recharge spreadsheets. First is the soil and land cover must match site plan. Soil determined by the soil survey, which from the NRCS web soil, and or chapter 12. And you can use chapter 12 defaults. And the pre and post development areas that the acreage should match. So here is the default soil series for the for you input on the first page of the groundwater recharge spreadsheets, and you can look at this one. And if you don't have the soil series name from the soil report or from the field soil survey, then you can use the default here. So after completion of the first page and have calculated the value of the annual deficit volume, you may continue to page 2 to check if the infiltration BMP provides sufficient recharge to meet the annual deficit. And here's a look of the second page. And same as the first page, the orange shaded area for input and the gray area are for the output. And reference back to the previous slides, the letters on the right shows the status of whether the calculations are correct. I can back here that you can see on the right here is the calculation check. And 3 buttons solve for A BMP to provide VDF, solve for DBMP, and the default VDF and AIMP are not really used in the spreadsheet. So when you use the BMP design, the input to check whether the annual BMP recharge is required. So though the results are auto-populated, all you have to input is the BMP and the BMP size, the depth, and also the impervious area that contribute to the BMP. And here are some other parameters that the segment BMP means that where is the BMP going to be situated in the post-development condition. And if you put the segment BMP, seg BMP as 0, then it means that the spreadsheet would use all the soil on the side that to have average for the root zone. And if you put a porous pavement system, The segment should be the impervious area of the post development. And other parameters from the second page is that the ABMP is the BMP area. That means the footprint of the BMP excluding the sloped area. The DBMP is the BMP effective depth, which is the maximum equivalent water depth that can be achieved in the BMP before overflow begins. If the BMP is filled with stone, the effective depth is the actual depth times the porosity. For slope BMP, like bioretention swell, use average DBMP, but adjust ABMP to keep the ABMP, that's the area times the depth, should be always equal to the storage volume of the BMP. And the dBMPU is the vertical distance from the vegetated ground surface to the maximum water level of the BMP. And we will have the illustration in next slide. And if the dBMPU is positive, if the maximum level is below the groundwater surface, and negative if that the maximum water level is above the ground surface. And DEXC is the vertical distance from the vegetated ground surface to the bottom of the BMP. And here's illustration of, for example, that that has a BMP that has vegetation on the bottom, which means could be a bioretention system. And so the dBMPU for this scenario would be a negative value, and DEXC would be 0 because the vegetated ground and bottom of the BMP are on the same level. And for this scenario, there would be a BMP that has no vegetation on the bottom of the BMP. For example, that's an infiltration BMP. So the dBMPU will be a positive value because the vegetation is above the water level. The DEXC will be the vegetation surrounding the BMP to the bottom of the BMP. And if you have underground BMP, such as pervious paving system, then you can see that the dBMPU is positive because the vegetation is, in the surrounding of the BMP is above the water level. And the DEXC was same as the previous scenario, that's from the bottom of the underground BMP up to the surface. And for here, the effective dBMP effective depth would be the depth of water times the porosity of the field stones. So let's take an example that we have BMP that designed to infiltrate stone water over an area of 6,000 square feet. And for this one, it's an infiltration basin. And you have sand there on the bottom, and then there's no vegetation. So the dBMP is the maximum water level before the water begins to overflow. From the figures, you can see the maximum water level during water design stone is at elevation of 12.5 feet. And normally, that's where the lowest orifice is at this level. However, this design has some kind of variation. From the detailed drawing of this outlet structure, we can see that the lowest orifice is at 13.36 feet, which is between the elevation of water quality sandstone and the 2-year stone. So in this case, the orifice of this BMP is set at an elevation higher than the water quality design stone. that means that will capture more runoff in order to provide enough runoff volume to meet the annual groundwater recharge deficit. And let's take a look of the BMP design input. This one is the scenario. There is no vegetation on the bottom. So the dBMPU is the vertical distance from the vegetated ground surface to the maximum water level surface level in the BMP. So the vegetated ground surface in this case is not the top of the burn. It should be the ground elevation surrounding the BMP, and there is an elevation at 15 feet. And the maximum water level before overflow is the elevation 13.36. So the dBMPU is the difference, and which the result in 1.64 feet. And the DSC is the distance from the vegetated ground level to the bottom of the BMP, so which is 15/12, so equal to 3 feet. And the BMP effective depth is the maximum water level depth, that is the elevation of the first orifice to the bottom of the basin. So it's 13.36 minus 12. And then the volume below the first outlet from the routine calculation, we know there is 59,400 cubic feet. So so for the ABMP, you can reversely calculate that from the volume and the dBMP. And so you can have the result of 43,676 square feet. So that would be your input in the groundwater recharge spreadsheet. And then after those input, the spreadsheet would give you whether the deficit has been met by the design of the BMP. So here's another example. If that is not the infiltration BMP, but a basin, but it's a bioretention basin, then you will have some parameters that will be different because the dBMPU will be different and the DSC will be different. And here we want to address some important requirement for recharge, groundwater recharge. The rule requires that for the recharge of stormwater with high pollutant loading, our industrial stormwater exposed to the source material is not allowed to be recharged. And all recharge BMP, other than calculation of the deficit and meeting the deficit, the BMP itself still had to meet the BMP design criteria in chapter 9, 10, and 11. And also all BMP that designed to infiltrate runoff must consider the adverse hydraulic impact on the groundwater table, which means the groundwater mounting analysis. So we will address that in next presentation. So here is the summary of my presentation. That I highlight some BMP chapters and safety requirements and MTD design, and also briefly address some inputs in the groundwater recharge spreadsheets. Okay, so the next one will be the mounting analysis. Before we move on, next one, let me check the questions in the chat. Lisa, is there any question that needs my response now?
Yeah, we have some really great questions, Chang'e. Just one second while I backtrack to the beginning of them. The first one is from Philip. If the impervious coverage is reduced in the post-construction, what impact does this have on the analysis?
You mean in the groundwater deficit analysis?
I
That
do
would-
believe this was
yeah.
asked early on in the presentation, so it probably goes back to how to review a project part. that-
You will probably have no deficit. So if you put those numbers in the groundwater recharge spreadsheet, you will get no deficit, or there's a negative deficit, which means that you have surplus. So, but when we said that the impervious coverage is reduced, but you also has considered whether you also change the vegetation cover on the site. For example, although you reduce the impervious surface, but you may bring down an area that has wooded area, you turn it into the landscaping area. So the wooded area in the pre-construction condition would have more groundwater recharge than the post-construction landscaping area. So it may also still create deficit. So that's why we always say that you cannot assume reduction of impervious coverage in a site would definitely meet the groundwater recharge requirement. You still have to demonstrate that in by running numbers in the groundwater recharge spreadsheets.
Additionally, I was thinking that Philip may have meant, as pertains, reducing impervious coverage in terms of the quality or quantity control calculations. So, Philip, if that is what you
Reduction
meant,
of the
yeah.
impervious coverage doesn't mean necessarily you will meet the water quality, because if you still have runoff from new impervious surface, there is not. If definitely you don't create any new motor vehicle service, then you don't have to meet the water quality. For water quantity, well, change reduction of impervious coverage. Possibly you will meet also the quantity, but it depends on which option you want to meet. And also when you change the slope of the site, or you have the collection system in the post-construction condition, other than it's just like a land cross overflow through the cover, you will change the time of concentration. So the peak flow rate may be in the post-construction may be still greater than the pre-construction, even you reduce the runout, the impervious surface. So it all depends the conditions and design. So again, you have to demonstrate that meets. You cannot just assuming, oh, I reduce the impervious surface, so I meet everything, part of the rules. Okay, cool. So for next one.
Is a green roof considered pervious or impervious? In other words, should the green roof runoff be calculated separate from standard roof like a connected impervious area?
I think we have addressed that in our green roof chapter. I think please take a look of the green roof chapter, and I will take that too. But take a look. I think we addressed the issues you asked there.
Okay, the next question. Is there a size limit for under drains used in pervious pavement systems?
I think we have the under drain requirement that you have to. There's certain limitation that needs the under drain. The flow rate passing under drain has to be greater than the permeability on the top of the soil media. There's some requirements, some you have to meet. Yeah, there's some limitation, but check the previous paving chapter.
Okay, the next question, I'm going to skip over the one on the vegetative filter strip because I actually have an answer for that. But let me see, where is this? So I will get back to the vegetative filter strip question, but when using exfiltration, does the BMP still need to store the entire water quality design storm volume as outlined in the rules, or just the volume not discarded through exfiltration?
I think in the BMP address the exfiltration rate. You can use, if you want to use the exfiltration rate for the water quality design stone, you have to meet some pre-treatment requirement. So yes, you can use exfiltration rate in the water quality design stone, but you need to address the pre-treatment for the small, but that is only, I think that's only for the small scale GIBMP. You cannot use the exfiltration rate in the routing for non-GI BMP.
And this may be the
check
last.
chapter 5. Yeah.
Yeah, and this may be the last question, but I will double check. Abhishek asked, if a basin is fenced, does it still require safety ledges?
The rule doesn't address whether it's fenced or not, as I can, if my recollection is correct. So yeah, it still need the safety ledge. You may, it's always the possibility someone would just, climb over that fence. So as I can remember, stormwater management rule does not distinguish whether the basin is fenced or not. It always says if you have a permanent pool that's greater than 2.5 feet, then you need those safety ledges. Yeah.
Okay. So, did I miss any questions? If I did, could you raise your hand?
Okay, so I don't see any hands.
These were good questions. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you. So we can have next one presented by Peter.
All right, hello everyone. I will share my screen now. So this is Peter Pliantos from the Municipal Stormwater Engineering Unit, and in this presentation, we'll dive into the groundwater mounding analysis requirements and calculations necessary for the use of infiltration BMPs. This material is covered in depth in Chapter 13 of the BMP Manual. My goal with this presentation is to cover the requirements under the stormwater management rules, as well as concepts, methods of calculation, and examples, all in relation to groundwater mounding analysis. The rules require we assess the hydraulic impact of the proposed development on the groundwater table and design the site to avoid adverse impacts. Well, in order to describe what is an adverse impact, let's take a look at what happens when we infiltrate stormwater. Below the surface, the groundwater table rises locally and then it needs some time to spread out before returning to stasis. When we force a concentrated amount into one area, we get mounding. This increase slows down the ability of the basin to infiltrate, so we can have problems if this increase is large enough to slow down the rate of infiltration beyond our 72-hour window, or from repeating this slowing down over and over, the basin can experience failure. Additionally, as this mounding spreads out, it can reach adjacent structures such as basements or septic systems. Let's look at a nice graphic that illustrates this. This illustration is in the paper prepared by Glenn Carlton from the United States Geological Society, or USGS. We have a house near an infiltration basin. The blue color area below everything is known as the saturated zone, whose top surface is the seasonal high water table. Imagine, if you will, that it rained. The rain has now stopped and runoff has collected in the basin. As stormwater infiltrates below the bottom of the basin, we get a temporary localized increase, or mounding, below the basin that is caused by stormwater infiltrating into the subsoils after the storm event. In order to dissipate, the volume of water under the curve has to move outward and downward until it returns to how it was before the rain. We need to calculate the maximum height of the mounding in order to assess the impact of infiltrating stormwater on the basin and on nearby structures. One method of covering the height of groundwater mounding is covered in Chapter 13. Sorry, one method of calculating the height, not covering the height. That method, known as the Hantush equation, dates back to 1967. It requires the computing capabilities such as that found in the Excel spreadsheet developed by the USGS. You basically enter in certain parameters and then click the Calculate button to see the results plotted. Additionally, the user gets results in the cells of a spreadsheet. There are certain ground rules, pun intended, for using the spreadsheet. So we'll go over what parameters we need to define, and then we'll look at making sense of the plot the spreadsheet creates by virtue of a macro. This is a screenshot of the Hantush spreadsheet. If you have used a spreadsheet in the past, you may find this spreadsheet a little bit different from the spreadsheet that was posted on the USGS website. That's because in March 2020, DEP published and adopted a new BMP manual chapter titled Chapter 13, Groundwater Table Hydraulic Impact Assessments for Infiltration BMPs, which provides both detailed guidance regarding the input values and examples illustrating how to conduct the groundwater mounding analysis. With permission from the USGS, we modified the spreadsheet. Here is how it looks today. All the calculation algorithms are the same, but the units and the notes on the use of the inputs are modified to be consistent with other chapters of the BMP manual. Chapter 13 and this spreadsheet are available at the link shown on this slide. To get more familiar with the Hantush spreadsheet, let's define the parameters listed here and establish the assumptions for their use in the spreadsheet. The first input parameter is the recharge rate. In the spreadsheet, you must use the design value for the vertical saturated soil hydraulic conductivity, which is 1/2 of the tested value of the vertical saturated soil hydraulic conductivity from soil testing performed in accordance with Chapter 12 of the BMP manual. The second input is the horizontal hydraulic conductivity, which is rarely tested on the scale of a single site just for the purpose of conducting a groundwater mounding analysis. Therefore, you will need to use presumptive values based on the site's location. If the site is located in the coastal plain, then the horizontal saturated soil hydraulic conductivity is presumed to be 5 times the recharge rate, i.e. the vertical saturated soil hydraulic conductivity. If the site is located outside the coastal plain, the horizontal saturated soil hydraulic conductivity is presumed to be the same as the recharge rate. Again, that is the vertical saturated soil hydraulic conductivity. If you recall, Lisa provided us in Module 2 with the link to the Bureau of GIS website where you can determine if your site is in the coastal plain. That link is also found on this slide. The next parameter is the specific yield, which is the volume of water that will drain from a soil specimen due to gravity, divided by the total volume of the soil specimen. Coarse soil will likely have a higher specific yield than fine-grained soil having the same porosity. Specific yield governs how much water the unsaturated zone can store when recharge reaches the water table. The more water that can be stored in the unsaturated zone, the lower the resulting mounding. Therefore, a soil having a higher specific yield may result in a lower mounding height than a soil having a lower specific yield when other inputs remain the same. For groundwater mounding purposes, specific yield is not calculated by subtracting field capacity from porosity. The hand-touch spreadsheet assumes that the BMP is rectangular in shape and the sides of the BMP are vertical. So we use the width and length of the bottom area of the BMP, also called the footprint, but since the mounding is highest at the center of the BMP, for graphing purposes, we use 1/2 of each dimension as the inputs for the length and width, which correspond to the X and Y axes, respectively, as the inputs. Now, for a circular shaped BMP, you're going to want to use the radius of the circular basin as both X and Y. For irregular shaped BMPs, you want to convert the shape to a rectangular shape that has the same depth of stormwater runoff to be infiltrated and is best fitted to the original shape. And then for BMPs designed with sloped sides, you'll want to use the bottom footprint as the length and the width of the BMP and use the total volume of the runoff to be infiltrated divided by the area of the bottom footprint to calculate the duration of infiltration period. We'll define duration of infiltration period in 2 slides, so bear with me. For the initial thickness of the saturated zone, unless proven by a field test showing the thickness of saturated zone beneath the proposed BMP, the default value is 10 feet. Note that the thickness of saturated zone used in the hand-touch spreadsheet is not the thickness of a large regional aquifer. It is the distance from the seasonal high water table to the first hydraulically restrictive layer. If a value greater than 10 feet is used, it must be accompanied by on-site testing results that demonstrates the value used is appropriate. The input value must never exceed 75 feet, which is based on the preliminary results of research conducted by the USGS. The exact maximum allowed value may be subject to revision based on the final results of the research. Any on-site boring used to justify a value greater than 10 feet must be a continuous sampling boring for the entire drilled depth. The duration of infiltration period, T, is equal to the time required for the BMP to drain the volume of stormwater runoff at the specified recharge rate, and is equal to the volume of runoff to be infiltrated divided by the product of the infiltration area and the recharge rate, where the volume of runoff to be infiltrated may be either the runoff volume produced by the water quality design storm or the volume of runoff to be discharged through exfiltration, if exfiltration of runoff during bracing routing is used. The maximum duration of infiltration period that may be used in the hand-touch spreadsheet is 72 hours. There are some other important relationships to understand. Delta H max is the maximum height of the mounding, and the value calculated by the hand-touch spreadsheet is that which occurs at the end of the duration of infiltration period. This is explained on page 17 of chapter 13. However, the hand-touch spreadsheet does not further calculate the mounding as it spreads out over time. We'll talk about this further in just a moment. Also keep in mind, a lower mounding height will happen when horizontal hydraulic conductivity increases, specific yield increases, and the initial thickness of the saturated zone, if that increases. You cannot just use the result from the spreadsheet as it appears. The results have to be checked against the physical constraints of the design. If you get a resulting mounding height that is higher than the distance between the base and bottom in the seasonal high water table, you do not get an artesian condition. It means the recharge rate is adversely impacted by a reduced hydraulic gradient and will be slower. That means you'll have to run the spreadsheet again after you make some changes. Because there is a proportionality between the recharge rate and the duration of infiltration, as shown in this equation, the changes include using a smaller recharge rate and a correspondingly longer duration of infiltration for the same infiltration area and the same volume of runoff to be infiltrated. Furthermore, if the mounding height just touches the bottom of the BMP, the rate of recharge will also be slower than the design value for the vertical saturated soil hydraulic conductivity. When this happens, you can stretch the duration of infiltration period while decreasing the recharge rate, or you can spread the volume of runoff to be infiltrated over a larger area. When opting to increase the footprint, you'll be able to use a shallower depth. There are some limitations associated with how the hand-touch spreadsheet operates. The graph produced by the spreadsheet is comparable to a snapshot in time of the mounding that occurs at the end of the duration of infiltration period. Since it's a snapshot, it does not depict what happens over time, as the mounding height decays and spreads out. During decay, while the maximum mounding height will be smaller, the mounding will expand into the horizontal direction. This means that if an underground structure appears to be above the mounding predicted by the spreadsheet, or out of range of the mounding altogether, it may still be inundated when the mounding height decays. Therefore, caution should be used when applying the spreadsheet to analyze adverse impacts to subsurface structures in proximity to an infiltration BMP. Now that we better understand the inputs to the hand-touch spreadsheet and the results it provides, let's go to some examples that illustrate the method and what to do with the results. The examples presented today are two of the ones included in Chapter 13 and are arranged from simplest to more complex. After a straightforward example, we'll look at an analysis that shows infiltration will be at a slower rate than the design saturated soil hydraulic conductivity and what changes need to be made because we encounter an impact. In other words, we'll see two different scenarios. For the first example, a major development located in the coastal plain proposes an infiltration basin whose bottom footprint measures 50 feet by 50 feet to infiltrate 5,000 cubic feet of runoff generated by the water quality design storm. And a few other things to keep in mind. The maximum depth of ponding water is designed to be 2 feet. Soil testing was performed in accordance with Chapter 12. The soil testing report shows that the seasonal high water table is 7.5 feet below the 6-inch thick bottom sand layer of the basin. The tested soil permeability rate is the tested soil permeability rate of the most restrictive soil horizon below the basin is 4 inches per hour, and no nearby underground structures are present. Okay, let's start with some basic calculations. Typically, the soil testing provides results in inches per hour, so the value for T would also use hours as the unit of measure. For the duration of infiltration period, we divide the volume of runoff to be infiltrated by the product of the infiltration area and the recharge rate. Also, remember that the recharge rate is 1/2 of the slowest tested saturated soil hydraulic conductivity rate from soil testing, Therefore, the duration of infiltration period is calculated to be 12 hours. When using the hand-touch spreadsheet, it is helpful to make a table of the inputs and the results, so they are ready to be added in later to the report. These inputs are organized to follow the order they appear in the hand-touch spreadsheet. The recharge rate is the first parameter entered into the hand-touch spreadsheet, but it needs to be converted to feet per day if you are using the older version. Feet per day is just inches per hour times 2. So here we would use 4 feet per day for R. The specific yield is set to equal the default value of 0.15. The horizontal hydraulic conductivity is equal to 5 times the recharge rate since the infiltration basin is located in the coastal plain. And the basin measures 50 feet by 50 feet. So we would just input half of each of those dimensions since the analysis is performed at the center of the basin. And then the duration of infiltration period is obtained from step 1. We also need to divide hours by 24 to get the number of days, which is 0.5 for this example, if we're using the older spreadsheet. T is less than the upper limit of 3 days. Lastly, the initial thickness of the saturated zone uses the default value of 10 feet. Alternatively, you can grab screenshots from the input section of the hand-touch spreadsheet, shown here with the parameter values from the previous slide entered in the gold shaded cells. This version of the spreadsheet is one that allows time to be input in hours rather than days and recharge in inches per hour. With the inputs entered, I clicked the dark blue Recalculate Now button and took this screenshot after the macro finished plotting the blue curve. The results show in the red cell in row 16 the maximum height of groundwater mounding, represented by the variable delta H max, equals 6.07 feet, which I have circled in light blue. And this is what will occur at the end of the duration of infiltration period. To put this in the proper context, I've also superimposed a symbol representing 1/2 of the bottom of the basin. Since the seasonal high water table, which the spreadsheet always sets at y equals 0, is 7.5 feet below the bottom of the sand layer, the temporarily elevated groundwater table, located at y equals 6.07 feet at the center of the basin, where x equals 0, will not reach the bottom of the sand layer. Therefore, the assessment shows no adverse hydraulic impact to the proposed infiltration BMP from the groundwater mounding. Remember that had the height of the mounding been high enough to intersect the bottom of the basin, it would mean the mounding would interfere with the infiltration capability of the basin. We would have to run a new model or trial that would involve increasing the basin footprint to spread out the volume of stormwater being infiltrated. That would result in a lower depth of stormwater runoff in the basin, since the volume is the same, and the duration of infiltration period would have to be recalculated before the spreadsheet is run again with these new parameter values. If you recall the duration of infiltration period equation from slide 21, the footprint area is in the denominator, so we would see the duration of infiltration period decrease proportionally as the area increases. Next, let's talk about when things go wrong, meaning adverse impacts. This slide is not for the example I just presented. It is meant to show you what happens in the spreadsheet when the groundwater mounting height is too high. If you click on the dark blue Recalculate Now button and the results show delta H max in the area I have circled is larger than the distance from the seasonal high water table to the bottom of your BMP, You won't be able to tell just by looking at the graph. In this case, the seasonal high water table is 8 feet below the bottom of a basin that is 50 feet in length. Sorry, 90 feet in length. The height of the mounding is calculated to be 9.51 feet. The plot by itself looks normal, but is it? We have to understand what is being plotted and check it against the reality of our design. The depth to the seasonal high water table is 8 feet. This does not mean groundwater will rise up in real life above the basin bottom like this. It means the temporary elevation in the groundwater table, located at the center line and above the seasonal high water table, will intersect and exceed the elevation of the bottom of the sand layer, meaning it interferes with the infiltration capability, and therefore it will take the BMP longer to drain. Adjustment of the basin design is therefore needed to reduce the impact of groundwater mounding. So we have to adjust our parameters and run the spreadsheet calculation again. To do that, we have to reduce the value for R. We don't know exactly how much it will slow, but my first attempt will try reducing it by 50%. However, we are not ready to click recalculate. The horizontal hydraulic conductivity is not adjusted since it is not affected by the reduced hydraulic gradient in the vertical direction. However, the duration of infiltration period must be proportionally adjusted to reflect this slowing down. For example, we would double the initial value for T if we halved R. Although we don't know the exact rate to which the rate will slow, even if it is slowed by 1/2, we're going to check the mounding for a value of T that is within the maximum allowable time period. Sometimes we call this stretching the infiltration period. Next, we recalculate and check the result to see if delta H max is now less than the distance between the seasonal high water table and the bottom of the BMP. You might try this one more time with T a bit longer, as long as the R value is proportionally reduced. If that doesn't work, you're going to check Chapter 13 for an example of changing the dimensions of the infiltration area. Okay, with that explained, let's move on to our second example. We're going to look at a dry well for the example of an adverse impact. Even a small BMP can cause one. So for this example, a site is located outside the coastal plain. A 7-foot high by 5-foot diameter dry well is proposed to store and infiltrate 137.4 cubic feet of roof runoff from a single-family home for the water quality design storm. Also note, the house has a basement floor located just above the groundwater table. The edge of the dry well is 10 feet away from the house. Soil testing was performed in accordance with Chapter 12. The soil testing report shows that the seasonal high water table is 2 feet below the bottom of the dry well. The tested soil permeability rate of the most restrictive soil horizon below the basin is 4 inches per hour. And the dry well is circular, so we calculate its area to be 19.6 square feet and input it into the equation to calculate the duration of infiltration period to be 42 hours. Using the same type of chart, here are the values for our input parameters. 1/2 of the slowest tested saturated soil hydraulic conductivity rate is used for the recharge rate in the spreadsheet. The specific yield is the default value of 0.15. The horizontal hydraulic conductivity is the same as the recharge rate since the site is located outside of the coastal plain. The duration of infiltration period is 42 hours. and the initial thickness of the saturated zone uses the default value of 10 feet. The results show the maximum height of groundwater mounding, 1.11 feet, that will occur at the end of the duration of infiltration period at the center of the dry well. The temporary groundwater mounding does not encroach upon the bottom of the dry well, where it would have impaired infiltration had the mounding extended that high. Are we done? No, we are not done, because the rules require that we also check the impact to the adjacent structure. Recall that the vertical axis is situated at the center line of the dry well, and the groundwater mounding curve is symmetrical on both sides of the vertical axis. The basement is 10 feet away from the edge of the dry well, which is 12.5 feet to the left of the center of the dry well. The spreadsheet results indicate the water table is also temporarily raised approximately 0.4 feet at the basement wall location nearest the dry well, which is an adverse impact prohibited by the rules. Therefore, the dry well may need to be moved farther from the building to avoid the adverse impact caused by the proposed infiltration. Per the USGS paper, an increase of 0.25 feet or less is an acceptable design for underground structures to be temporarily affected by groundwater mounding. The mounding height at 20 feet from the dry well is just less than that. But considering the limitations of the hand-touch spreadsheet I brought up earlier, it would be advised to place the dry well even farther than 20 feet from the basement, since the mounding decay, which is not modeled, may result in a rising of the groundwater level at the basement area higher than as it is shown in the hand-touch spreadsheet. This example shows that even a small infiltration BMP may have an adverse impact on nearby underground structures. If you haven't read it, Chapter 13 includes a lot more examples. Please see example 7 in the chapter for guidance when replacing soil below an infiltration BMP. Also, Chapter 5 includes examples with groundwater mounding analyses and includes exfiltration in the routings, which is allowed in certain circumstances for green infrastructure BMPs. Thank you all very much for your attention, and here is my contact information. Now I will check with Chang-Yi to see if we are going to address any questions or take a break.
There's one question regarding dry well. I have to think about it and find the chapters. So yep, I think we can move forward to the quiz while I'm searching the answer. Thank you.
All right, thanks.
All right, everyone. It's time for quiz 3. I think you all know the ropes by now, so I'll move through these first few slides fairly quickly. As I'm sure you remember, you have the option to follow the link shown on this slide to open the training website in a new tab on your browser, where you will find the quiz links at the bottom, or you may use the camera app on a smartphone to scan the QR code found in the bottom right of this slide. Once you click on the link for quiz 3, you'll be directed to the quiz, which is now open on SurveyMonkey, I believe. The quiz link and QR code will be posted in the chat by our staff as well. Also, make sure to click submit at the end of the quiz to get credit for completing it. And you must answer every single question before you can advance to the next screen and finally submit. You may only take the quiz once. So here's everything all in one place. Just a reminder, the quiz link is also in the body of the email that was sent for the invite to this module. So it is now 3:31. Please go take the quiz and be back in 15 minutes. So let's say 3:46, and by then we will go through the review.
Hi, everyone. We're going to wrap up the break/quiz taking at 3:45. So that will give us enough time to review the quiz before our 4 o'clock deadline. Unfortunately, that means that we will not have time today to go through the common issues in project design presentation. You do have the slides on the website, and I believe that we will endeavor to make a recording if we can and post that with the class videos so that you still can benefit from that training. So please wrap things up. We have about 2 more minutes before Minesh will begin the review of the quiz 3 questions. Thank you. Okay, everyone, the time is 3:45. I'm going to turn everything over to Manesh, who will start the review. But please keep working on your quizzes if you haven't completed them. We need them for your attendance record. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Lisa. All right, welcome back, everyone, and let's get right to the review. So we're going to go straight to question 4. Which one of the following is not a green infrastructure BMP? And the answer is D. Extended detention basins, which are found in Chapter 11 of the BMP manual, are not considered to be green infrastructure. Small-scale bioretention basins, vegetative filter strips, and pervious paving systems, they're all GI BMPs, and they can all be found in Chapter 9 of the BMP manual. Question 5, when reviewing water quantity calculations, which of the following must the reviewer check for accuracy? And the answer is actually all of them. It's D. There are various things you need to check, and land covers, basin design, and hydrographs must all be checked for accuracy when you do a site review for water quantity. Question 6, which of the following conditions must be met when a stormwater BMP is allowed to infiltrate the entire runoff from the 2, the 10, or the 100-year storm? And the answer is D, all of the above. Infiltration of the entire 210 or 100-year storm is allowed only when existing site conditions are such that no runoff leaves the site for the pre-construction condition scenario, thereby constraining the design to infiltrate 100% of the volume produced by the post-construction condition for the same design storm. The maximum storm that can be entirely infiltrated is the largest storm event with no runoff leaving the site in the pre-construction condition. For example, if there's no runoff for the pre-construction 10-year storm, but there is for the 100-year storm, then for the proposed condition, the maximum design storm that can be fully infiltrated is the 10-year storm. And then the answers for B and C, they paraphrase what is found in the rules. Only small scale GIBMPs can be used to infiltrate runoff of a storm larger than the water quality design storm, unless required by another rule or agency. And soil testing of saturated hydraulic conductivity must be performed strictly following Chapter 12 of the BMP manual. Question 7, what is required as part of the municipal stormwater management plan to grant variances or exemptions from the design and performance standards? And the answer here is C, it's a mitigation plan. A municipality must have an approved mitigation plan as part of its municipal stormwater management plan to grant variances or exemptions from the design and performance standards. We will revisit variances in Module 4 on Thursday, so keep that in mind. Question 8. If you have an impervious surface that has existed for 10 years, but has removed this impervious surface prior to the submission of the application that includes a stormwater management review component, can you still use this impervious surface as an existing condition in the stormwater management calculations? And the answer here is no. We use the land cover that has the lowest runoff potential that existed on site in the past 5 years for the existing condition. If you remove impervious cover, anything you replace it with is going to have a lower curve number, regardless of when that impervious cover was removed. So impervious surfaces removed prior to the application cannot be counted as an existing condition. Question 9, true or false? If a project has been reviewed by the NJDEP Division of Watershed Protection and Restoration, formerly known as dealer or land use, the municipality does not have to review it for compliance with its Stormwater Control Ordinance or RSIS. And the answer is false. The municipality is required to review all projects that trigger their definition of major development, regardless of whether they were reviewed by the NJDEP Division of Watershed Protection and Restoration or any other regulatory agency. Remember, the municipality may have a slight difference in its definition of major development and can even be more strict than the definition in the stormwater management rules. So keep that in mind. Question 10, which of the following would be exempt from the groundwater recharge standard? And the answer here is B, previously developed portions of a site in a designated center. Just being in a planning area 1 is not an allowed exemption from the groundwater recharge standard, nor is redevelopment automatically exempt. Only previously developed portions of sites in the designated locations that are listed on the slide can be exempt. Question 11, true or false? Reducing impervious surface on a redevelopment project always meets the water quantity control standard. And the answer is false. Reducing impervious surface can help meet the quantity standard, but you would still need to be compliant with one of the 3 water quantity options. Question 12, can an infiltration basin be designed with a perforated underdrain pipe as a means of discharging runoff from the basin? And the answer is B, no. An infiltration BMP cannot have an underdrain pipe if it wants to meet the criteria for an infiltration basin in accordance with the BMP manual. Question 13, true or false? The TSS removal rates requirement must be met on each subdrainage area of a site unless the discharge from each drainage area converges to a single discharge point on site. And the answer is A, true. You have to meet the standards for each drainage area, but also be aware that if runoff from drainage areas converge on site, and no adverse environmental impact would occur as a result of compliance with any one or more of the individual standards being determined utilizing a weighted average of the results achieved for that individual standard across the affected drainage areas. Question 14. When can a wet pond be considered to be a green infrastructure BMP? And the answer here is C. Both of these statements above must be met. In accordance with Note D to tables 5.1, 5.2, and 5.3, only a wet pond designated to maintain at least a 10-foot wide area of native vegetation along at least 50% of the shoreline and include a stormwater runoff retention component designated to capture stormwater runoff for beneficial reuses such as irrigation can be considered a GI BMP in Table 5-2. Question 15, true or false? When the groundwater mounding reaches the bottom of a BMP designed to infiltrate, the infiltration into the subsoil will be adversely impacted. And the answer is A, this is true. So yes, when the mounding reaches the bottom of an infiltrating BMP, the hydraulic gradient is going to be reduced significantly, and the flow rate infiltrated through the BMP is going to be reduced as well. Question 16, what method is used to calculate the groundwater mounding height? And the answer here is B, the hand-tush spreadsheet. So the hand-tush spreadsheet is used to calculate the maximum height of the groundwater mounding that's directly below the basin. So that's the end of Module 3 here. The final session, Module 4, is this coming Thursday, December 14th at 1 o'clock. I'm going to hand it over to Changi and Lisa. Do we have anything else we want to talk about?
Sorry, we run out of time, so the next presentation on the agenda addressing the common issue, we will not have the time, but we have the slides in the handouts available for you to review. And if you have any question, you can contact us. Thank you. That's for today. Thanks.